It's very fitting that Asia Biblical Theological Seminary and Delhi Bible Fellowship should sponsor a lecture on how the Bible created modern India. The Bible is under tremendous attack in India and in the West, and yet this is the book that has created the modern world and modern India. So we have the last few copies of my book, the book that made your world, how the Bible created the soul of Western civilization, and modern India is a part of that civilization, not yet fully modernized, but is part of that civilization. These are the last few copies, and you're very welcome to pick them up. I do have 3 books, Legacy of William Carey, Missionary Conspiracy, Letters to a Postmodern Hindu, and India, the Grand Experiment, which are studying how the Bible has created modern India. I have a new manuscript which is called How the Bible Created Modern India. That's the working title. And there was a thought that I might be able to release it here today, but I just haven't had the energy to go through that manuscript and revise it and get it ready for publication. But God enabling, one of these days that book will be out in the market. And in fact, what I'm going to present to you is a brief summary of that 200 or so page book, How the Bible Created Modern India. So I salute Asia Biblical Theological Seminary and Delhi Bible Fellowship for, thank you, for standing for the Bible in today's world where that book is under such a heavy attack, the book on which the modern world depends. The greatest proof that the Bible created modern India is an individual, Shri Narendra Modi, who is the Prime Minister of India. He is the greatest proof. Today, if anybody wanted to argue, did the Bible create modern India, you just have to look to Mr. Modi. He came to power a few months ago with the slogan that Achhe Din are coming, good days are coming. That is anti-Hindu statement. Hinduism, Hindu cosmology believes that the universe begins with Satyug, degenerates to Treta, Dwapar and Kali Yuga, and then ends in Pralaya. So Hindu cosmology already believes that we are living in Kali Yuga. How can you have good days coming in Kali Yuga? The idea that Hindu fatalism is wrong, but human beings and individuals such as Mr. Narendra Modi, and I do pray, the Lord, you please bless him, give him success, that India will indeed have great days ahead. That is my prayer for him and for his vision. But this idea that individual can change future, that future need not be worse than today, that it can be better than today, is an idea which begins with the Bible. The first book of the Bible to be written by Moses is Exodus, when Moses is called to lead slaves out of their slavery into a land flowing with milk and honey. That you don't have to live in slavery. And just imagine in this ancient pagan world, Moses going and speaking to elders of the Jews, Israelites, the Hebrews at that point, that good days are coming ahead. What are you saying? We've always heard that history goes from bad to worse. So, fatalism is wrong, that human individuals can make a difference, we can shape our own destiny, is an idea that comes from the Bible, and I have quite a bit of discussion of that in this book, so I won't repeat that right now because we have to cover a lot of spectrum. Second reason, example from Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji is his slogan, or he began to describe himself that I am your Pratham Sevak, your first servant. That's what Prime Minister means. That's an anti-Hindu idea. It comes directly out of the Gospels. This was what Pandit Nehru used to say, that my countrymen, I have come here to you to address you as your first servant, because that is what Prime Minister literally means. I heard Nehruji say that when I was just 13 years old. I had cycled about 10 kilometers to go and hear him because our school said we should, and I thought this was a great idea. The whole city was going there, I should also go. So I picked up my bicycle and went. And when I heard him, I understood what he was saying. He was part of a political revolution that began in a little nondescript upper room in Jerusalem, where the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, stood up from the dining table, disrobed himself, put on the robes of a servant, took a basin of water and a towel and started washing the feet of his disciples. And he said, do you realize what I have done? You call me Lord, and that's what I am. But I have come here to start a new kingdom amongst the Gentiles. Their rulers lord it over them. In India, in traditional India, out of religious principles of caste system and such as caste system, their pagan rulers rule over them. But in this new kingdom, whoever wants to be the greatest will become a servant. I've come here as your servant, and I'm initiating this new kingdom in which, if you want to be the leader, you have to become the servant. Now this revolution, it was this revolution which led to the British Civil War and the bloodless revolution in 1688, whereby the kings of England began to lose their powers, and servants, ministers, began to increase their power to the point that the first servant became the most important office. And he served not with a battalion of police or military men, but he served with a battalion of civil servants. That is the revolution that came to India. And when Modi ji describes himself as your first servant, he is in fact affirming that he is standing in the tradition that Jesus began in that upper room where he redefined leadership. His slogan of Swachh Bharat, Clean Bharat, is a third illustration that he is anti-Hindu. He is following Moses and the Bible. I wish I can take an hour to explain that, why Mahatma Gandhi's effort to clean India failed. Gandhi was sincere, serious about getting the upper castes to clean this nation. His biggest fights with his wife were on this issue. That she refused to clean toilets. And he said that if you have to live in the ashram, you have to clean toilets because this is not dirty work. Now, that is an idea which isn't coming. The reason why Prime Minister Modi ji is fighting against Indian culture in making the officers and leaders become sweepers is because it was Moses who said that God is holy. I am holy, therefore your camp should be holy. When you go for toilets, take a little instrument, cover the mess that you make. Because I'm holy, I want to live in your camp, you should be holy. Now, Hinduism has been opposite of that mindset, and I understood it many, many years ago, 75 I guess, when I was researching Hindu gurus. My first book was The World of Gurus. I visited the ashram of Swami Muktananda in Ganeshpuri in Mumbai and studied his very interesting biography. that he was on a spiritual quest, going from holy man, holy place to holy place, pilgrimage to pilgrimage, to find one person in this nation who he could believe was actually enlightened. Now, what is enlightenment? In Advaita, which is monism or pantheism, the idea is that all is Brahma, all is God. He went to all the holy men. He didn't find any enlightened person in India. And as he was giving up his spiritual quest, he was passing through in front of a city. And in those days, there were no toilets, there were no running water, there were no flush toilets. So the old tradition was that if the lower caste went out for toilet and the upper caste had an outhouse where you squatted and there was a tin under you, and then the sweeper woman would come in the morning and pull out what they call night soil back then. It's called night soil. She'll put it in a tokri, in a basket, and put that on her head and take it and dump it outside. That was our idea of cleanliness. So as Muktanand was passing through this pile of filth, human excreta, he saw a naked ascetic sitting on that pile. Muktananda immediately knew that here is a man who is truly enlightened. Why? Because you know what the Hindu guru said to the hamburger vendor? Make me one with everything. What that means is everything is God. Enlightenment is becoming one with everything. When you exclude something as filthy, then you're not enlightened, because you don't see that this is Brahma, this is God. Now, I won't take too much time going into it, but the question, why did Mahatma Gandhi, in spite of being serious and sincere in cleaning India, failed? His campaign failed because this love for cleanliness and exclusion of all dirt is an idea which is coming from the Bible, from Moses in particular, from God, saying that your camp should be holy because I am holy. There are things that you are not permitted to embrace and welcome, because there are things that please God and there are things that displease God, that are against His will. So not everything is God's. A lot of the things are not from God. The fourth thing that I'm just giving as an illustration from Modi ji, that he is the biggest proof that modern India is created by the Bible, is his slogan, Make in India. We had a whole session on it, 1 hour, 15 minutes the other day at YMCA auditorium, and in a day or two it should be up on our camp, so I will summarize 1 hour, 15 minutes in 2 or 3 minutes for you. But if you want to pursue that, the theme of that lecture was, why don't we make in India? Because he's not the first one. I narrated the history of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who 80 years ago said that India must become a productive nation. We should make in India. He was opposed by none other than Mahatma Gandhi, because Mahatma Gandhi was against industrialization. He wanted simplicity, he wanted charkha, he wanted self-reliant villages, against industrialization because of idealists such as Ruskin in England, etc. So the Gandhians opposed Nehru within Congress, but he succeeded in winning the argument that we have to liberate India not just from the British, but we have to liberate India from poverty, from this mindset that the educated upper classes don't work with their hands, that the people who work with their hands, they are not allowed to cultivate their minds. And therefore, we are not a technological, industrial civilization. We have to be in that lecture, I talked quite a bit about farming, for example. The best 3 cows in India are 2 from Gujarat, Kankraj and Gir, and 1 from Andhra Pradesh, Ongole. These are the best cows. But if you go to Gujarat, 1960s was the last time where cows were exported out of Gujarat, these best cows. And then all this agitation against cow slaughter and cow exportation began. As a result, all of that was stopped. So you would imagine that Gujarat is filled with these great cows. But I reported on Thursday night that Gir cow, there are only 3,000 cows in purebred Gir cows in Gujarat. In Brazil, guess how many are there? Same cow, exported from, taken from Gujarat. Not 30,000, not 3 lakhs, not 30 lakhs, but 50 lakhs. So Gujarat has 3,000 cows. Brazil has 50 lakhs of those cows. Same cow, Gir, gives 10 to 12 liters of milk in Gujarat, and it gives 40 to 48 liters of milk in Brazil. Just when Modi ji became the chief minister of Gujarat, because cow export was banned, the Brazilian cow breeders, they spent 2 crores of rupees in putting up a laboratory in Bhavnagar, where they were collecting semen and embryos and exporting those because that was legal. And they now have 50 lakhs of those cows, and we have only 3,000. Now, so his call that we should make for India is good call, because this is what God wanted. When God called Abraham, God said, "You follow me, I will bless you, I will make you a great nation." And that simply doesn't simply mean that I'll give you tons of children. Most of his physical children were not part of his, most of his ethne was not part of his nation. Only through Isaac was his nation built. But God is saying, I will give you land, I'll give you geography, territory. And this will be a land flowing with milk and honey. That's, among other things, what it means to be a great nation. And you will be a productive people. So the command, "You shall not covet," meant that you shall create. You will be a creative, productive people. And that's the call that Modi ji is giving. And that again is an anti-Hindu call, because the upper castes in India were not supposed to be working with their hands. They were not supposed to be creative. And that ethos continues. We have some friends from IIT here, and without meaning to offend any of them, I would love to ask them if my assessment is true, that most Indian students who go to IIT, to the best technical institution, actually have no intention of producing anything. After completing their IIT, they want to do MBA, and they want management leadership positions. Well, it may not be true of Delhi IIT, but it's certainly true of the agriculture, the university, deemed university when I'm a professor, is a University of Agriculture, Technology and Sciences. Anyone who comes to study agriculture or animal husbandry or dairy technology has no intention of improving agriculture in India, or dairy farming, or animal husbandry, or the breed of cow. We leave that to the Brazilians. We want to be the officers, preferably with central government based here in Delhi. So we are not studying these subjects to be productive, creative. That's the cultural ethos against which Nehruji struggled, and he failed. Now, socialism was a factor. Why Nehru's attempt to create in India, make in India, failed. But much deeper problem is our cultural problem, which I have discussed in that lecture, so I won't take more time to discuss. So far I've just made 4 very simple points to say that the fact that the Bible has created modern India, the biggest proof is Modi ji and his slogans of Achhe Din Are Coming is a biblical idea that human beings can shape their own destiny, that fatalism is wrong. His call, his declaration that I am first servant of India, Pratham Sevak, is coming right out of Jesus' mouth via Nehru. His call for Swachh Bharat is coming from Moses. It's anti-Hindu. His call to make in India is an attempt to invite us to be like God, who is a creator, not a dreamer, not a meditator. He doesn't meditate the universe into existence. Universe is not Maya, it's not his dream. He works for 6 days to create the universe, and he wants us to be like him, creative, productive. Therefore, we should be making in India, making things in India. And that's why we can agree with Modi ji and work with him and support him in transforming our nation to become more biblical. Now, this is not to say that he's a Christian, and this is not to say that he isn't genuinely what he says he is, a Hindu, and that ultimately there wouldn't be a clash of civilization, conflict within himself and his supporters, who would like India not to move more towards the Bible, but move more towards traditional Hindu culture. He is in some ways duty bound to do that, and that conflict would be very interesting to watch, because the more Hindu he becomes, more he will fail in achieving his objectives, which are Christian. But let me leave that there. This is not so much for you, but for my RSS friends who will be watching this on YouTube. Speaking to them through you. But let's go to the question, did the Bible create modern India? We'll go a little bit into history, or actually quite a bit into history, and then move into future. India never had the concept of India. There was never the notion of nation in India. This is a notion that came from the Bible. So the concept of a nation called India came from the Bible. We are in Delhi. In some ways, Modi ji is the first Hindu ruler of Delhi since 1192. 1192, now Vajpayee ji not counting him as a Hindu because he was liberal, at least perceived to be, so not counting him as a Hindu and not counting Nehru ji as a Hindu. If Modi is in fact to be taken seriously as a champion of Hindutva, then since 1192 there has not been a Hindu ruler in Delhi. The last one was Prithviraj Chauhan. What happened to Prithviraj Chauhan? 1191, Muhammad Ghori came to Delhi. He had come 1186 to Punjab. So the Rajputs who were ruling here, and my mother comes from that community, the Rajputs who were ruling in different parts of North India, they realized that we need to get together and have a federation of Rajput rulers and resist Muhammad Ghori. So when he attacked Delhi in 1191, Prithviraj Chauhan was able to defeat him, the brave leader of this Rajput confederation. He defeated and won. 8-9 months later in 1192, Muhammad Ghori returned. He had 120,000 soldiers. Prithviraj Chauhan had 3 lakh horses. and 3,000 elephants. And yet, Muhammad Ghori defeated Prithviraj Chauhan on his home turf, where he had the supplies and the support structure, and Muhammad Ghori had no support structure, but he defeated. Why? Because Jayachand, the king of Kannauj, which was a bigger kingdom than Delhi at that point, supported Muhammad Ghori. Why? Before talking about Jayachand, Ghori is coming into India approximately 170, 180 years after Mahmud Ghazni. Mahmud Ghazni from 1001 or whatever to 1030 when he died, he came at least 16 times, possibly 17 times. He had no intention of ruling India. He just wanted to loot the temples, because temples is where the wealth was, and no Indian was willing to lay down his life in defense of those temples, because that money wasn't doing any good to India. So why should I lay down my life to defend the wealth stored up, hoarded in those temples? So he came at will. Every time he came from Khyber Pass, there was only one way to come, right? Why didn't India build the Great Wall of India? It would have been much smaller than the Great Wall of China, and it would have kept the invaders out. No one ever thought of building the Great Wall of India because no one thought of India. It wasn't part of our consciousness. Now 180 years have gone, or 70 or whatever. No one has built a defense system to keep the invaders out, and we all knew that Khyber Pass and those 5 rivers of Punjab is the only way they have to come. We could have built the defense systems along those rivers, as they had in Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings. We could have had a sign system, signal system. No one thought of it because no one thought of India as a nation. Everyone was thinking of their own little kingdom. Now, why did Jayachand support Muhammad Ghori and let a Muslim take over a Hindu kingdom in Delhi? The reason was Jayachand had organized an Ashwamedh Yagya, the horse sacrifice, which was the highest religious ritual. If you are a king, you want to become a greater king, a bigger king, you have a horse, you put 500 young people, 1,000 young people with swords and sticks and spears behind this horse, and horse goes into your territory for 20 miles and your territory for 30 miles and someone else's territory for 10 miles, and all the villages and towns in that territory become mine. So I become a greater king because you have to accept my sovereignty or fight with me, but you are debauched, drunkard, you don't really have the courage to fight with me, so you give in. But your son is really mad with my son. So he organizes an Ashwamedh Yagya to try and take my territory back, or what was used to be his father's villages and towns back, and plus a few more villages. So these animosities and rivalries, divisions continue because of our highest religious ritual called Ashwamedh Yagya. Jayachand organized one. He wanted to be the ruler of North India. Prithviraj Chauhan was his mother's sister's son. So both the mothers of Prithviraj and Kannauj were real sisters. So they were first cousins. And he said, no, I'm not accepting your sovereignty. So Jayachand made a clay statue of Prithviraj and put it at his door, that you fellow, you're good enough only to be my doorkeeper. It was an attempt to insult publicly Prithviraj Chauhan. Well, Jayachand's daughter Sanyogita was ready to get married. Swayamvar was prepared. All the princes and kings, single bachelors and married, were invited, that she can choose who she wants to marry. She can garland. So all of them were sitting in the royal hall, and she had been fascinated with the stories of the bravery of her great uncle Prithviraj Chauhan, and she was in love with him. So she walked past all the princes and kings, went straight to that clay idol statue of Prithviraj and garlanded Prithviraj, and he was hiding behind the statue, the brave man that he was. He picked up his now fiancée, put her on the horse, galloped back to Delhi, and that was what created the jealousies. Now my point is that the highest religious ritual, Ashwamedh Yajna, was one of the factors that prevented India from becoming a nation, because it pitched every king against every other king. We were rivals, we hated each other. So caste system was, of course, a bigger, deeper problem, that the lower castes had no reasons, no motivations to give their lives to defend the kings. I mentioned that my mother comes from Bundela, a Rajput family, and I'm ashamed to say that in Chhatarpur, where the Bundelas, big rulers, where I've lived for a long time, the lower castes were not allowed to walk in front of the palace. They had to crawl. When you're crossing the territory of the palace, you have to crawl if you're low caste. Mahatma Phule describes the condition of the lower caste just in the 19th century, that they had to tie a broom behind them so that the broom will wipe off the dust of their feet, so that no upper caste person walks. That this was the humiliation that the caste system had produced. So if I'm a low caste in your kingdom, why should I fight to defend your kingdom and lay down my life for you, because you have made me a slave? Maybe the invader will treat me a little better, right? But leaving the caste system aside, the question, why weren't even Hindu kings, all belonging to Kshatriya caste and all being royals, why couldn't they get together to defend Delhi from Muhammad Ghori? In fact, our religiosity had, Hinduism in other words, had so badly divided India into small kingdoms that we were colonized. In spite of the fact that Muhammad Ghori has only 1,20,000 soldiers, and Prithviraj Chauhan has 3 lakh horses. So my point, with due respect to all our friends in Hindutva, the scholars, the plain, simple, historical truth is that Hinduism never made India a nation, because it never even had the concept of nation. The concept of empire came to India with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, when he was conquering the world and building his Macedonian or Greek empire, Chandragupta Maurya went and met Alexander the Great, and that inspired the birth of the Maurya Empire in India. So we had the concept of Hindu kingdoms, and we had the concept of a Greek pagan empire, the pagan idea of empire. We had no idea of a nation. So several kings did attempt to build empires in India following the Maurya dynasty, but no one succeeded as well as the Mughals after Babur here in Delhi, and then Mughal Empire was taken over by the British Empire. So there was concept of kingdom, there was concept of empire, there was no concept of nation. What's the difference between an empire and a nation? In an empire, you are a subject. In a nation, you are a citizen. As a subject in an empire, you pay taxes. But no one consults you how much tax you will pay and how that tax money will be spent, whether it will be spent to build a Red Fort and a Taj Mahal for the bones of my beloved wife, or whether the taxes that I collect from you will be used to build dams and canals and roads and bridges and warehouses and public institutions. So tax you pay, but in an empire, tax is an extortion. In a nation, the rulers cannot collect any tax from you without consulting you, without approving you. So today, end of February, when the budget is presented, if the budget fails in Parliament, doesn't get the vote of the Parliament, then the Prime Minister has to resign because he cannot collect any money from you. That's a nation. So a nation is a moral concept in which you have rights and privileges, responsibilities and duties, opportunities and support structure. So nation is a moral concept which begins in Genesis 11 and 10 when God destroys the pagan attempt to build Babel as an empire, confuses the languages and creates nations. And in Genesis chapter 10, 3 times, nation is defined as people in a territory with a language. That's what a nation is. In Genesis 12 begins the concept of great nation. You follow me, I will make you a great nation. And a great nation is not ethne. A great nation is a nation under God, bound together by a covenant. Moses makes that point in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verses 5 to 8, that I've given you these statutes, these laws. If you obey them, all your neighbors will say, what a great nation this is, wise and understanding. Twice or 3 times Moses repeats that you will be a great nation if you are a nation under God's law, God's covenant. So it's a covenant that makes a great nation, not ethnicity. I won't pursue that, but I do recommend this book, which is by my friend Babu Varghese' book, Let There Be India, the Bible's impact in nation building. If this size intimidates you, buy it and donate it to the Library of Parliament, or Nehru Library, or JNU Library, or IIT Library. If we don't do history, the correct history of India, the Hindutva forces or the leftists and the secularists are not going to do it. This was a PhD research by Babu Varghese submitted to Nagpur University, where he's arguing that Bible created modern India, and he's coming to it from linguistic angle, where I will summarize in few minutes. But I might say that when he submitted his thesis to Nagpur University, they appointed 5 Brahmins to examine his thesis, and they took 3 years to look critically at it, where he is arguing that every single modern Indian language is a creation of the Bible translators. Along with that came dictionaries, lexicons, grammars, printing, education, journalism, and social reform, how the Bible created modern India. So he's using linguistics as a entry point. After 3 years, these 5 scholars gave him a PhD and wrote a unanimous letter that when this is published, it should be a required reading in every department of linguistics, because it's telling the history of Indian languages, but much more than that, from a particular angle. And the one reason I want you to buy this book is because we need a dozen of you to do this kind of a PhD level research if we have to really exalt the Word of God in this nation, what the Word of God has done for India. So do read it. It's very simple reading. But my foreword to the book is expounding why the whole emphasis on seeing nation as ethne, which has come from Fuller Theological Seminary, promoted by the U.S. Center for World Mission, etc., has been wrong and very destructive. I'll come back to that. But right now, I'm making a point that Hinduism never made India a nation. It couldn't make India a nation. It had no concept of nation. When Mahatma Gandhi was challenged with this argument, he says, no, Hinduism didn't create India as a nation because we had 4 dhams, 4 pilgrim centers in 4 corners of geographic India. Well, if that is, if the Rome says, the Vatican says that because there are Catholic pilgrim centers all over India, all over the world, therefore all of it is part of Rome. Or Muslims saying that because we have a mosque here in Delhi, therefore Delhi belongs to Muslims. The nation is different. Yes, religion did spread, but it spread all the way to Indonesia. That Bali's, that doesn't make Bali part of India. Hinduism spread to Nepal, that doesn't make Nepal part of India. The point that I'm making, that Hinduism never made India a nation. This concept came from the Bible. Let me first give very simple illustration, then go a little deeper into it. Why are natives of North and South America Indians? Why are natives of Australia, native inhabitants of Australia, Indians? The nation of Indonesia is a collection of number of islands. How did it become one nation, Indian Asia, Indonesia? Vasco da Gama is looking for sea routes to the spice land. Why isn't Kerala and Goa spice land rather than India? He's after spices, as the secular historians would tell us, right? Why does he say that I'm trying to find sea route to India? India doesn't exist as a nation. Well, the answer is Esther 1:1. India is the farthest eastern point mentioned in the Bible. It doesn't talk about China or New Zealand or Australia or Japan. It talks about India. Now, India is a Persian word. They couldn't pronounce Sindh river, so it became Hind or Ind. And India, it is a Persian word. And that's what Esther is saying, that the emperor of Persia ruled up to India. But it was not because Europeans, Columbus or Vasco da Gama were, or Captain Cook, were interested in reading Persian literature, but because they were reading the Bible and they wanted to get to the farthest eastern point, which is India. So therefore he goes to South America and says these are Indians, or somebody goes to Australia and says these are Indians, because I've gone as far east as I could. So the European mind, which called us India, was fascinated with the concept of India because of the Bible. Now, nobody's going to say that. You have to say it, because that's why you have to write history book. Don't leave it to historians appointed by Modi ji. But, okay, geography you can call India, but the concept of nation, where does that come from? I've already discussed that Genesis 10 is the origin of the concept of nation as people, territory, languages. Genesis 12 is the origin of the concept of great nation, which is God's mission, that these nations who don't know how to live, how to give them light, how to bring healing to them, how to make them great nations. And that's what he's doing. And that is the reason this evening meeting is being held, because he wants to bless the nations. He wants us to disciple nations, not individual souls. Individual souls are important. But Psalm 2 says that Father has given to his Son, ask of me, and I will make nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. God is interested in nations. That's why Revelation 22:2 says that the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations in the new heavens and the new earth. There are still nations that are sick that need to be healed. I talked about it this morning in CBC, so I won't repeat that, but do watch that audio, do hear that audio. The concept of nation, as it came to India, 1555, when the first round of the battle between the Lutherans and the Catholics ended, that's where the seed of the concept of nation began to emerge, that the princes of German city-states or German states, they are independent nations, and the prince should be free to decide whether he wants to be Catholic or he wants to be Lutheran. So the peace of 1555 is where the seed of the concept of nation came into Europe. It was already there in the Bible. But 1648, Peace of Westphalia, is where the modern concept of nation emerged as a part of Western political philosophy. For 80 years, Holland, which was at that time 17 different provinces ruled by Spain, had been fighting after the Reformation for 80 years. Leyden, War of Leyden was 75 years, but total for 50 years, the Dutch provinces had been fighting against Spain because they were reading the Bible. That God created nations, which is territory, language, and people. We are one territory, Holland. We speak one language in several dialects. Why are we ruled by Spain? We are ruled by Spain, Holy Roman Empire, because Rome was a pagan empire before it became Christian. When it became Christian, it brought in a pagan political philosophy into Christendom, just baptized a pagan empire as Christendom, Christ's kingdom. It is not Christ's kingdom, it is a pagan empire. Spain should not be ruling over us. We, the 17 provinces, they changed, became 13 and 7 because provinces kept merging. So at different periods of that 80-year war, which was first 50 years was Holland, last 30 years was whole of Europe up in flames and fires of religious wars from 1618 to 1648, which concludes in the Peace of Westphalia, where a number of theologians, one of the most prominent one is John Amos Comenius, the bishop of the Moravian Brethren. That was a Protestant movement that began 100 years before Luther. He was the last bishop of Moravian Brethren. He's known as the father of modern education because he wrote 80 or 90 books on education. So he really changed the medieval education into modern education, but that's a different story. But he was also a political philosopher, and he articulated what became the Protestant concept of nation coming out of the Bible. Not the Fuller Theological Seminary concept of nation, but the Protestant concept of nation, which broke up the Holy Roman Empire. So the Protestant Reformation didn't simply break up the Roman Catholic Church into Protestant Church and Catholic Church. It also broke up the Holy Roman Empire into nation states which are part of modern Europe. So this was a Protestant concept. And that inspired America's political transformation. North America that is, was 13 colonies of England. These are British colonies. They were being taxed by King George, but they had no member in Parliament. So no taxation without representation. This was a principle which came from the conflict of Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Jeroboam was working for Solomon. Solomon was taxing people, first tithes and offerings, that built the temple. Then he began to tax people to build the shrines for his many wives, for their gods and goddesses. And Jeroboam revolted that this is now, you have become a Hebrew Jewish Pharaoh. We used to work for Pharaoh, now we are working for you and for your wives. This is wrong. So that led to a conflict. Jeroboam fled to Egypt. When Rehoboam, Solomon's son, became king, Jeroboam came back, took the elders that, look, you lighten this tax burden. And the elders advised Rehoboam that, yes, listen to these people. If you serve them now, you are their king, but serve them. Then they will serve you all their lives. But he didn't listen to the wise men, counsel of the older people. He listened to the younger people, split the kingdom. And the kingdom was split on this issue of no taxation without representation. If you don't listen to us about how much the tax will be and how this tax money will be used, you have no authority to rule over us because we are free people. That was the battle in America. But the question is that at the end of American Revolution, why didn't 13 colonies become 13 kingdoms? Why did they become one nation? They were inspired by this Protestant concept of nation, which was hammered out in the Peace of Westphalia and modeled in Holland becoming a nation, Switzerland becoming a nation, a number of these nations in Europe becoming nations. That inspired America, and that in turn inspired India. And I won't go into too much more of that history because I'm just giving you an overview. But to fast forward to 1945, the end of the Second World War, America could have colonized Germany. America could have colonized Japan, having beaten them. And America and England could have created united empires. They didn't create united empires. They created united nations, and President Roosevelt in 1940-41 had argued with Winston Churchill that you've got to put an end to this colonialism and you've got to give freedom to all the colonies. And Roosevelt has much bigger impact on Churchill than Mahatma Gandhi and Congress Party. We became free substantially because of American influence on Churchill. Roosevelt was not going to join the war unless Churchill was willing to make it a moral war, because Roosevelt's point was, what's the difference between you and Hitler? Hitler has colonized Holland and Romania and this, that, and the other. But you have colonized India and Kenya and Singapore and many, of course, at that time, Australia. Australia was still a British colony at that time, though the treaty, the Westminster Statutes, had given Australia a right to be free, which was accepted by Australians, backdated in 1939, etc. But those details of history are not relevant right now. The point is that it was the biblical idea of nation because of which India became a nation. India became a nation in 1858 after the mutiny. It became a free nation in 1947, but it became a nation in 1858. So this is the biblical concept of nation. Now this is not part of our theological education because we don't do political theology, we don't do theology of economics, and we don't do a lot of these theologies. Our theology has become highly reductionistic, but I'm grateful that ABTS is seeking to change that. I've taken too much of the time in making just this one point, that Bible created India as a nation. Bible created India as a free nation is the theme of my book, India the Grand Experiment, and I better not go there. Let me just make one point which has become very important now in our culture there is, the Bible created Bible defined Hindu marriage. Hinduism never had the concept that one man should marry only one woman. The first Hindu social reformist is Raja Ram Mohan Roy. He never spoke against polygamy because by the time he was 9 years old, he had 3 wives. That's not a criticism of him. That's our culture. The battle against polygamy and for monogamy began in 1850s with Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, etc. 1870 with Keshav Chandra Sen leading the campaign. 1872 is when Christian Marriage Act was passed, under which many of us had been married. Same year, a shadow bill was passed for those sects that were rejecting Hinduism, such as Brahma Samaj, Pratna Samaj, etc. That if you're part of that sect, you can only have one wife, and that wife should be at least 15 years old, no child marriage, etc. But Hindus were not willing to reform Hindu marriage. British had become too weak as a result of the mutiny of 1857, so they wouldn't touch it. Only in 1946, the British prepared a bill that Hindus should have only one wife. But Nehru and company said, you have no business legislating about our marriages, you get out of India, we will decide what Hindu marriage is. So when freedom did come in 1947, in the Constituent Assembly, Nehru and Ambedkar tried to put it in the Constitution that a Hindu can have only one wife. But Rajendra Prasad, who later became our president, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and the Congress leaders opposed Nehru and Ambedkar, and it didn't get into our Constitution. So in 51, Nehru as the Prime Minister, Ambedkar as the Law Minister representing Republican Party, Nehru asked Ambedkar to bring a law that a Hindu can have only one wife. 4 days there was debate in Parliament. Congress opposed the bill. Nehru tried to bully the Congress MPs, said, look, if this bill fails, I will resign, which means there will be fresh election, which means I won't give you the tickets. You better vote for Ambedkar's bill. They didn't. Why? Because every Hindu member of, well, not every, but majority Hindu members of Parliament knew that Nehru and Ambedkar are trying to impose biblical idea of marriage upon Hindus. Gandhi was another reason why his influence on Congress was another reason why Congress defeated the idea. It succeeded only in 1955 when Ambedkar was able to split that act into 4 or 5, 6 parts. Long story, but I won't go into it. The point is that only in 1955, after 105 years of battle, beginning with Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Bible has defined what marriage means for Hindus in India. You need to do a PhD on this, because this is a very serious issue, because now even Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi want the Supreme Court to redefine marriage as one man with another man or one woman with another woman, and if you are bisexual, then you should be free to marry one man and one woman. The Bible has created India, and a lot of the battle over marriage was that if we want India to become a great nation, a developed nation, if we have to emancipate our women, and nothing emancipates women better and more effectively than the institution of marriage defined as one man, one woman, lifelong and exclusive relationship. This definition of marriage, and if you want to pursue more of that, do buy this book. There is a chapter on marriage here, which is defining how the Bible created this concept of marriage. No culture in history has required a husband to love his wife. You see American president kissing his wife in public, but our prime ministers don't have their wives. An American president has to kiss his wife in public because the Bible says, husband, love your wives. He has to appear to be a good husband, even if he's not, but most have to be. But America is still the only nation in the world where if a candidate for presidency does not have a good marriage, if he's fooling around with other women, he has to get out of the race. And Alexis de Tocqueville was the one in 1831-32 who is the inspiration behind Keshav Chandra Sen and Vidyasagar and Nehru and Ambedkar, who understood that the Western nations had become great and strong nations because of the biblical definition of marriage. Now, I have all of that in that book, so I won't go any more into it. But on these 2 points, I've gone a little bit in detail that how the Bible created modern India, even personal, private institutions such as marriage have come from the Bible. The concept of rule of law. If the Prime Minister says to the police officers, you go and you kill these people because they are Muslims or Jews or Christian or minorities or whoever, should the policemen go and kill them, or should the policemen arrest the Prime Minister and produce him before the judge? Is this nation going to be ruled by law, where the police, the magistrates are servant of the law, they're not servant of the king? That is freedom, because it's God's law that you shall not kill. This concept of rule of law. Yesterday in the World Hindu Congress in Ashoka Hotel, they said our enemies, Macaulayism. There were 5 M's, Muslims and missionaries and materialism and Macaulayism, etc. Macaulay is the one who gave us Indian Penal Code, the rule of law, which was biblical law fitted into Indian context. Again, we don't have the time to go into it. We are losing all of that. Our political philosophy, our economic philosophy, our individual social philosophy of definition of marriage, sociology, etc. All of this has come from the Bible. No Hindu historian, sociologist, no leftist historian, sociologist is going to say this. You have got to do the PhD level research, and therefore definition of theology and theological education has got to be expanded. We cannot allow American Bible seminaries to define what theological education is. Well, it's time for me to wrap up. It's too late already. Bible created modern India. This is study that Khusro did write some Urdu shairi here. But Muslim scholars hated Khusro for that. Why? Because he was corrupting their sacred language, Arabic, their classical language, Persian. It was Henry Martyn who, through his translation of the New Testament, created Urdu language. If you go into the Red Fort, the couplets there are in Persian. Because during the Mughal Empire, Persian was the court language of India. When the British came here, the court language of India was not Sanskrit, was not Hindi, it was Persian. Because Jahangir had been given 14,000 soldiers by the Persian emperor to win back Babur's empire, another story. How did Tulsidas was there writing Ramcharitmanas, but every single Brahmin hated Ramcharitmanas because scriptures had to be written in Sanskrit, but he was writing in Purvaya. Hindi was created out of Hindustani. There were a number of players, but finally modern Hindi that we consider a national language was created in Allahabad, in Katra, by a Presbyterian missionary, Reverend Kellogg. He separated Hindustani from Hindi. So what? At the time of independence in 1947, India was 500, 600, 700 princely states. Some states ruled by the British, a lot of princely states. Those were reorganized as linguistic states, Malayalam and Telugu and Tamil and Gujarati and Marathi and Bengali and Assamese, etc. That process of 150 years is what is described in Genesis 10. Linguistic states. How were these princely states? And the impact of that in creating modern India is what Dr. Babu Varghese is studying in all of this, and I've run out of my time, so I won't go into it. But I've just thrown these number of suggestions. Each one of them needs a 2-hour seminar, and each one of them needs a PhD thesis. But let me stop there and give you time for questions so that if we could take up some of the details. But hopefully I have thrown sufficient evidence at you, bombarded you with a machine gun to argue that the Bible is the book that has created modern India. Without that book, this nation will collapse. Therefore, Delhi Bible Fellowship is right in being a proud expositor and champion of the Bible, and therefore ABTS is right in promoting biblical theology in Asia. Thank you.
Next question. What is the difference between the Protestant concept of nation and the Fuller Theological Seminary concept of nation?
Thank you. In 1945, 41-42 was when Roosevelt imposed Protestant concept of nation upon Churchill, because England was a confused nation for 450 years. There were two reformations in England. First began with Tyndale translating the New Testament, smuggling it into England, and then people began to read the New Testament for the first time in English, and that triggered off an intellectual ferment. Second Reformation in England was Henry VIII wanting to divorce his fourth or fifth wife. Pope said no, so he said goodbye to the Catholic Church, and Catholic Church became Anglican Church with Henry VIII as the head of the church. He accepted some Protestant ideas, but his political philosophy, political theology remained Roman, because the Roman Catholic Church had become Anglican Church. So there was a biblical church in England which was Puritan in many different denominations, and there was the Anglican, which is Anglo-Catholic, which a Catholic idea of Christendom. So the Anglican, high Anglican that is, political philosophy was pro-empire, British Empire. The biblical Christians from England were pro-nation, and that's something which secular historians in India cannot make sense of. Why are some British supporting Indian nationalism, other Christians supporting British Empire? But this is not a peculiar Indian problem. This is what happened in America in 1776 when the American Revolution began. The Christians in those 13 colonies who fought in defense of the British empires were Anglicans and Episcopals. The Christians in America who fought against Britain were Puritans, Independents, Congregationalists, Presbyterians, Methodists, etc., who were more biblical, believing in nation, not empire. So the British American Revolutionary War was perceived as Scottish Protestant Presbyterianism fighting against Anglicanism. Those parts of history we don't see the details because secularists are just not interested in the theological underpinnings of what was happening. But Roosevelt So this confusion in England continued. Churchill was a pro-empire man. He was against nations and against freedoms. And Roosevelt imposed upon him that America is not joining the war unless you give up your imperialism and you set all of these colonies free. So those nations that Churchill agreed, and then those allies who joined the war along with America, they were called United Nations 3 years before UN was born. So January 1st, 1942, de facto United Nations was born because they had accepted the American Protestant concept of nation over against the British Anglican concept of empire. So this was end of the Second World War when United Nations was formally created. Protestant idea of nation won. But at the same time, immediately afterwards, the Protestant idea of nation came under a heavy attack. Beginning with three Catholics, Robert Schuman, briefly the Prime Minister of France, but Foreign Minister and Industry Minister, and then another Catholic statesman in Germany, and third in Italy. Three of them, good Catholics, good Christians, but with no understanding of nation. They began to blame both the world wars on German nationalism. The German nationalism is the evil which has imposed the two world wars. If we want to protect Europe from the Third World War, we've got to get rid of the idea of nation and the idea of nationalism. Nationalism became a dirty word. So this concept of which became EU, European Union, was undermining nation, recreating a European empire, but not through force, but through negotiations. Stalin, on the other hand, in Russia, also rejected biblical Protestant idea of nation and created USSR as an empire, undermining the Protestant concept of nation. But then the secularists joined the Catholics. So secularists and Catholics began a massive campaign that German nationalism is the cause of the two world wars. We've got to get rid of the concept of nation. We've got to undermine nationalism. So nationalism is a dirty word, even in America, in the universities. Patriotism you can still talk about in America, but nationalism nobody can talk about. You'll be shot as bigoted, etc. But in Europe you can't talk about nation. And that is the problem which is happening with Ukraine now. That is the territorial integrity of Ukraine important. But EU has undermined the philosophical foundation of the concept of nation. And therefore Putin is able to get back into Russian empire. But this is the problem with IS. The Muslim world, all of the Middle Eastern nations are creation of the British and American and French ideas of nation. And now Muslims are saying, why should we accept these European concept of Syria as a nation, Iraq as a nation? We should have a Shia, a Sunni caliphate. Now, what happened in Fuller was that because the Catholic and the secular intelligentsia began to attack the concept of nation, Dr. Donald McGovern, the US Center for World Mission, he surrendered to the secular attack on nation instead of saying that German and Italian fascist Nazi nationalism was not biblical nationalism. God is saying to Abraham, I will make you a great nation, not so that you might take over other nations, but so that you might bless other nations. God loves all the nations. God is saying, you fight to take on your own nation, but you don't take the nation I've given to Ishmael or Edom or Moabite. I've given these territories to them. You've got to respect them. You've got to live as good neighbors with them. So, instead of American evangelicalism, British evangelicalism was already dead. There were hardly any thinkers at that time. In Martin Lloyd-Jones was there, but were Bible expositors. They were no longer applying biblical theology to these political, economic, social issues. America was, but with the Fuller Seminary, and their passion, which had been already corrupted for evangelism and saving of souls for 50 years earlier, because secularists are attacking the concept of nation, Dr. Donald McGovern surrendered to it and began to lamely redefine nation as people groups. The nation means ethne means the people who are bound together with ethnicity. And that then became the dominant theme of evangelicalism, that we want, God loves people groups, he doesn't love nations. He wants to bless people group, means make them have lots of children, that's all he wants. He doesn't want them to find healing and light and justice and hope. So discipling nation has come to mean in American evangelicalism saving souls or saving people groups, not discipling nations and baptizing nations. So Protestantism and evangelicalism are two different things, and during the last 100 years, American evangelicalism has corrupted Protestantism. Now that's very hard to say in DBF because of your history and relationships with American evangelicalism, but my lecture, Why Christianity Lost America, 2 hours, 20 minutes, is completely edited. We have a copy, but it should be up on YouTube, etc., and certainly on revelationmovement.com, where I'm giving my 9.5 thesis. And one of the reasons why Christianity has lost America is because Billy Graham cared for souls, he didn't care for the nation. Therefore, nation has every reason not to care for the gospel. But it's very hard to say this before Americans because Billy Graham is such a revered person. He is a good man, he is a great man, but he's part of a theological error which has destroyed America.